The smoke rose from the hillside every morning, thin and gray against the winter sky. There was no cabin, no shed, no sign of any man living there, just smoke lifting from frozen ground like the earth itself was breathing. It was the winter of 1884 into 1885, and Dry Creek Crossing had already settled into the kind of cold men thought they understood. Councilman Thaddeus Rourke had searched that slope 3 times. He had walked it end to end, looking for the structure that had to be there, looking for the boy who had to be hiding somewhere. He found nothing: snow, dead grass, and that same thin wisp of smoke that seemed to come from nowhere at all. "The boy's gone," he told the town. "Froze out there somewhere." But Luther Hale was not gone. He was 12 feet below Rourke's boots, warm, fed, alive, and by late February of 1885, when the whiteout came, he would be the only reason anyone survived. Some stories get buried over time. Some truths only reveal themselves when everything around them starts to crumble. And this story is far from over. If you want to see it through to the end, hit like and follow, because the next part might just change the way you see everything. Luther Hale was 17 when hardship found him for the first time. Not slowly, not in parts, but all at once. His father, Merritt Hale, had been a wagon man, steady hands, careful habits, the kind who checked a knot twice before trusting it. The accident came on a morning that did not look dangerous. A low wind, a thin crust of frost over packed earth, the kind of day men misjudge because it does not announce itself. The team spooked when the rear axle shifted. The load pulled wrong. Merritt stepped in to correct it. He never stepped back. By the time they carried him home, the work was already finished. 3 days later, the ground over his grave had not yet settled when Dora Pike, the widow by law and keeper of the claim, made her position clear. She did not shout. She did not argue. She did not need to. "The deed is in my name," she said, standing in the doorway that had once been his father's. The land, the house, all of it. Luther stood there with nothing in his hands, no papers, no witness that would speak for him. Only the memory of a man who had known how to hold a line straight and build something that lasted. "That makes you a guest," Dora continued, "and I don't keep guests." A brindled dog named Bran stood close at Luther's leg, silent, watching. There was no negotiation, no second chance offered out of kindness. Only the law, clean and narrow. "Take what's yours," she said. There was nothing to take. Luther turned once, not toward the house, but toward the yard, measuring distance, not loss. Then Dora Pike closed the matter with a sentence that did not need to be raised to be final. "Get off my land." By the time Luther Hale reached the edge of Dry Creek Crossing, the story had already outrun him. Men had heard, women had heard, and like most things in a small settlement, the truth had been trimmed down into something simpler, easier to judge. A boy turned out. A house reclaimed. Order restored. Councilman Thaddeus Rourke stood near the front of the mercantile, where men gathered when they wanted to be seen agreeing with one another. He watched Luther approach without stepping aside, his coat buttoned high against the cold, his posture straight with the confidence of a man who believed he understood how things worked. "This is what happens," Rourke said, not loudly, but clearly enough for the circle around him to hear, when a boy mistakes stubbornness for sense. No one interrupted him. Rourke's eyes stayed on Luther, measuring him the way he had measured that hillside, looking for structure, for weakness, for something to correct. "A decent boy stays where he's put," he continued, "finds his place, works it." A pause, then the sentence that settled over the crowd like frost. "Only a stray goes to ground." A few men nodded. One or two let out a short breath of agreement. No one spoke against it. Luther did not answer. He did not slow. He did not look back. He did not offer defense or explanation, as if the judgment had passed through him without finding anything to hold. Bran stayed at his side, close and quiet. And behind him, Dry Creek Crossing made its decision without ever calling it that. It turned its back, not all at once, not with noise, but with that small, final shift in posture that says a man no longer belongs. Luther Hale had not learned survival the day he was cast out. He had been taught long before he understood why it mattered. Memory took him back to the years when his hands were still small, fumbling with the grip of a shovel beside Ephraim Voss, the reclusive builder who had outlived more winters than the valley cared to count. Ephraim didn't waste words on explanations. He showed a thing once, then let the work speak for itself. They had stood on a barren slope of hard-packed earth and scrub grass, where the wind cut across the land without resistance. The ground holds what the air forgets. The old man's voice echoed in his mind. Heat, time, even the summer. He taught Luther how to cut into a slope at an angle to break the wind's path, and how to ghost a chimney behind scattered stone so the smoke thinned into nothingness. Luther had listened with a boy's quiet reverence, unaware that one day those words would save him. Luther Hale did not wander far after leaving Dry Creek Crossing. He went where memory told him to go. Ephraim Voss lived beyond the last worked plots, where the land turned uneven and the wind no longer broke against fences or timber. The old man did not seem surprised to see him. Luther did not explain himself. He did not speak of Dora Pike, or the councilman, or the town that had already closed its ranks behind him. He stood there with Bran at his side, and said only what mattered. I need ground. Ephraim studied his stance, asking for direction rather than help. There's a strip east of the coulee, Ephraim said, at last. Rough land. No one filed it proper. Wind runs through it too hard for crops. Folks said it wasn't worth keeping. He stepped aside and reached for his coat. They weren't wrong, he added. Not for what they were trying to do. A pause. But it'll hold what you need. Luther nodded once. No hesitation, no second question. He turned toward the open land, already seeing it not as it was, but as it could be used. Then he stopped, just long enough to speak the decision that would set the rest in motion. Show me where to dig. The ground did not open easily. Luther Hale chose the slope Ephraim Voss had marked, an angled face of packed soil and stone that caught the early light and shed the worst of the wind. It did not look like shelter. It did not look like anything a man would build into on purpose. That was the point. He began with a cut no wider than his shoulders, driving the shovel in where the earth held firm but not frozen solid. Each strike took weight. Each lift took breath. There was no wasted motion. Dirt came out in measured loads, not scattered, not left where it could betray the work. Bran stayed near the edge of the dig, ears turning to every sound that did not belong to wind. When the dog stiffened, Luther paused. When the dog settled, the shovel moved again. Ephraim did not take the tool. His hands were too worn for that kind of work. He stood above the cut and corrected what mattered. Not straight, he said. Angle it. Let the air break before it finds you. Luther adjusted. The tunnel dipped slightly, then opened. Day by day, the chamber took shape. 11 feet across, 18 deep. The ceiling arched just enough to carry weight without collapse. Timber crooked lengths of juniper hauled from a dry wash went in as ribs, set tight, wedged against the earth, so they worked with it, not against it. Over that, he packed soil. Layer after layer, pressed, tested, pressed again. No gaps, no clean lines for wind to follow. The entrance did not face the open. It bent away from it, hidden behind a fold in the slope and a scatter of stone that had been there long before the first shovel strike. From above, it read as nothing. From the front, it disappeared before a man could focus his eye. The roof rose slowly until it was no longer a roof, but ground again, thick, heavy, continuous with the hillside. Ephraim stepped down into the chamber, once the first form held. He did not praise it. He walked the perimeter, pressed his palm to the packed walls, looked up at the arch. Then he gave a single nod. It'll carry, he said. Luther stood in the center of that cut space, chest rising, hands raw, and looked at what had not existed a week before. For the first time since he had been turned out, there was something around him that did not move when the wind did. It held. Word traveled the way it always did in Dry Creek, crossing quiet at first, then sharpened by repetition. Someone had seen smoke out past the coulee, not from a stovepipe, not from any place that made sense. Councilman Thaddeus Rourke did not dismiss it this time. He gathered a handful of men ranch hands, a teamster, one carpenter who knew how to read a structure by its shadow, and rode out before the light had fully settled across the land. If something was there, he intended to find it. If the boy had survived, he intended to see how. They spread across the slope, boots cutting shallow tracks into the frost-hardened ground. Rourke dismounted first and moved on foot, eyes low, scanning for breaks in the earth, for edges where something man-made might give itself away. "There's smoke," one of the men said, pointing toward a thin gray thread lifting from a scatter of dark stone higher up the incline. Rourke followed it. He walked straight toward the source. The ground there looked no different than the rest, hard, windswept, unremarkable. A few stones set into the slope, grass flattened by weather. No opening, no structure. He stepped onto the rise, boots pressing into soil that did not shift. Below him, Luther Hale stood still in the chamber, one hand resting lightly against the packed wall. Bran's head was lifted, ears locked toward the faint, muffled thud of movement above. The sound carried through the earth, dull, distant, but unmistakable. Ephraim had said it would. "Men will walk right over you," he had told him. "If you build it right, they won't know what they're standing on." Rourke paced the area once, twice. He crouched near the stones where the smoke thinned and broke, touching one with his gloved hand as if it might reveal something hidden beneath it. It did not. "There's nothing here," one of the men said. Rourke remained a moment longer, jaw set, eyes moving across the slope as if refusing to accept what he could not prove. Then he stood. "We move on," he said. And just like that, they did. Boots turned, tracks shifted, the search continued elsewhere, and the truth stayed where it had always been, silent, intact, and buried, right beneath their feet. After the search party rode off and the sound of hooves faded into the distance, Luther Hale went back to work. He did not hurry. He did not pause to consider what it meant that they had missed him. The ground had held. That was enough. The chamber was not finished. Not yet. He cut a second drop beneath the main floor, digging down into colder, denser earth, where air moved slower, and decay took longer to begin. The pit was narrow, deep enough to store what little he could gather: roots, dried meat, anything that needed to outlast the days ahead. He lined the edges with flat stones scavenged from the coulee, setting each piece tight so the soil would not collapse inward. Over it, he laid a rough cover of split wood and packed dirt to seal it from the air above. The stove came next. Not large, not wasteful. A narrow firebox built from scavenged iron and stone, fitted close against the wall so it gave heat without drawing too much from the room. The pipe ran thin, angled, and long carried through packed earth and out beneath the scatter of dark rock above. By the time smoke reached the surface, it had already cooled, broken, and thinned into something the eye could mistake. Each morning, it rose again, thin, gray, unclaimed. Inside, Luther hung strips of meat along the warmer side of the chamber, letting the slow heat cure them instead of burning them dry. Bundles of grass and old hide went up along the walls, layered where the earth needed help holding its line. Nothing was placed without reason. Nothing was built for show. Bran learned the rhythm of it, the silence, the work, the small shifts in air and scent that marked what belonged and what did not. Above ground, Dry Creek Crossing found its explanation. "Smoke with no cabin," someone said at the Mercantile. A few laughed. Others repeated it, the phrase taking shape the way simple things always did when they were easy to dismiss. Rourke heard it, but said nothing. He did not laugh, but he did not go back out to the hillside either. And each morning, while the town spoke of what could not exist, the system beneath the earth grew tighter, quieter, and more complete. By the time the first real cold settled in, Luther Hale no longer had a place to hide. He had a place that worked. The cold settled in without ceremony. It did not arrive all at once. It pressed down over days, tightening its grip a little more each night, until the ground rang hard under a boot, and the air cut clean through cloth and bone alike. Ephraim Voss chose one of those days to come down into the shelter. He did not announce himself. Luther heard him first as a faint shift above, then the careful descent through the angled entrance. Bran lifted his head but did not bark. The old man belonged. Ephraim stepped inside and stopped. He stood there longer than usual, letting the stillness of the chamber settle around him. No draft, no sudden drop in warmth near the walls. The air held steady, not close, not thin. He moved slowly along the perimeter, pressing his palm against the packed earth, testing the joints where timber met soil. His eyes traced the curve of the ceiling, the line of the stove, the way the heat moved without wasting itself. Outside, the wind had already begun to rise. Inside, it did not exist. Ephraim crouched near the firebox, watching the way the flame pulled clean and narrow, then disappeared up the pipe without backdraft or smoke spill. When he stepped back, there was nothing in the room to suggest where that heat had gone. He gave a short nod. "Better than what I built at your age," he said. Luther did not answer. He did not need to. Ephraim turned toward the entrance, listening for a moment to something beyond the reach of sound inside the chamber. "The air's wrong," he said. A pause. Not just cold, turning. He looked back once, not at Luther, but at the walls themselves, as if measuring them against what was coming. "This will hold," he said, "if it's left alone." Another pause. Longer this time. But it won't be. The wind outside rose another notch, dragging fine grains of ice across the slope. Ephraim's voice dropped, not in fear, but in certainty. "There's a storm building past the horizon, not a long one, a beat, a hard one." He stepped toward the exit, then stopped just short of it. "This will outlast what's coming," he said. And then he went back out into the cold that would soon test every wall built above the ground. After Ephraim Voss left the hillside, the land did not change all at once. It shifted in small ways first, the kind most men saw but did not read. The wind lost its pattern. It came from the west in the morning, then turned without warning by afternoon, cutting low across the coulee as if searching for something. The air warmed for a day, just enough to soften the surface, then locked hard again overnight, sealing everything in a brittle skin. Livestock gathered tighter than usual, heads low, movement reduced. Birds moved early. Bran noticed before any of it made sense. The dog grew restless at the entrance, nose lifted, tracking currents that did not hold steady. At times he would stand still, ears angled toward distances that carried no sound to human hearing. Other times, he circled once, then settled close to the inner wall, as if choosing ground that felt safer. Luther watched, not the sky first, but the dog. He made no announcement. He did not name what he saw. He worked. More wood came in, cut short, stacked tight, placed where it could be reached, without opening the chamber long. The storage pit was checked, then checked again. Meat shifted, covers sealed. Every seam tested with a hand, not an eye. Nothing added without reason. Nothing left loose. Above ground, Dry Creek Crossing saw the same days. A warm afternoon, a sharp freeze, wind that would not settle. Councilman Thaddeus Rourke stood outside the Mercantile one evening, coat open despite the cold that would return by nightfall. "False break," he said when someone mentioned the change. "Winter's losing its grip. Happens every year." A few men nodded. They had seen winters pass before. They trusted what they remembered. Below the hillside, Luther trusted what was changing, and the land, for a brief stretch of quiet, held its breath. The storm did not announce itself with thunder. It arrived in the space between one breath and the next. By mid-morning, the sky over Dry Creek Crossing had flattened into a pale sheet with no depth to it. By noon, the temperature dropped hard fast enough that men felt it before they understood it. By afternoon, the wind found its line. Then it held it. Snow came sideways, fine at first, then thick, then constant. The distance between one cabin and the next began to disappear until it was no longer safe to cross without losing direction. Day one broke the edges of things. Doors rattled against their frames. Window seams leaked thin lines of powder that gathered along sills and floors. Chimneys pulled uneven, some drawing too hard, others choking back smoke into the rooms they were meant to warm. "Keep the fires high," Rourke said, moving from one structure to the next, voice steady, hands visible, the way a man keeps order when order still seems possible. "Burn through it. We've seen worse." They had not. By the second day, the wind shifted again and drove lower. It found every gap, every joint, every place where wood had been trusted to hold against something it had never truly been tested by. Snow forced its way under doors, through roof lines, along walls that had seemed solid in calmer seasons. Drifts formed where no drifts had formed before, rising against structures until the outside pressed inward. The wood piles became harder to reach. Not far, not distant, just far enough that stepping out meant losing sight of the door behind you. Men tied ropes from posts to thresholds. One misstep, one gust at the wrong angle, and the world beyond arm's reach disappeared. Inside, the fires burned hotter. And still, the cold began to find its way in. Not all at once, but enough to notice, enough to understand, for the first time, that something in the system was no longer holding. By the third day, the storm stopped pretending. Wind drove low and constant, packing snow hard against every surface, until the drifts were no longer soft. They pressed, they held, they carried weight. Then the roofs began to answer. A shed went first, not loudly, just a short crack, a settling sound, and then a section of beam giving way under a load it had never been built to carry. Men ran to it, too late to save the structure, just in time to understand what was coming next. "Clear the tops," someone shouted. They tried. For a while, men tied off and climbed where they could, scraping, shoveling, pushing snow from roof lines as fast as it gathered, but the wind replaced it faster than hands could move. Every cleared section filled again before the next could be reached. By afternoon, the second cabin failed. This one louder. A sharp break, a drop, snow and timber collapsing inward together. There had been someone inside. They pulled him out, but the cold had already done its work. The first death did not bring silence. It brought speed. "Burn anything that holds," a voice said. "Chairs, tables, break it down." Furniture went next, then spare boards, then anything that would take flame. The fires roared higher. Still, the heat did not stay. The wind found new paths as the structures shifted under pressure. Gaps widened where joints had once been tight. Air moved where it should not have moved. Inside, the cold came in layers, first at the floor, then along the walls, then in the air itself. By the fourth day, men stopped trying to control it. They moved instead to endure. Doors froze in place, hinges locked, rope lines vanished beneath drifted snow until the paths between the houses no longer existed, even in memory. Livestock died in the barns, some from cold, some from collapse, and through it all, through the noise, the breaking, the shouting, the growing count of names that would not answer there, was still that thin, steady line rising beyond the edge of town, smoke, unbroken, unaffected, visible only when the wind eased just enough to allow it, a mark in the distance that did not belong to anything they could see. By the time the fourth night settled in, Dry Creek Crossing understood something it had not known on the first. The ground they had trusted was killing them, and somewhere beyond it, something else was not. By the fifth day, there was nothing left to manage, only what could still be carried, and who could still move. The wind had not stopped, but it had thinned just enough to let shapes return to the world. Not clearly, not safely, just enough to know direction if a man already had one. Councilman Thaddeus Rourke stood in what remained of the main street and did not speak for a long time. Around him, the town had folded in on itself, roof lines broken, doors buried, paths erased. The fires had burned through what they could, and there was little left to feed them. The choice was no longer between options. It was between movement and death. Someone pointed first, not with certainty, not even with hope, just a hand raised toward the eastern rise. "There," the man said. "You see it?" Rourke followed the line of his finger. For a moment, there was nothing. Then the wind shifted, and it appeared, thin, gray, unbroken. The same line he had seen before, the one he had dismissed, the one that had not changed while everything else had. Rourke did not argue this time. He gathered who could walk, 19 in all. Some steady, some carried between others, faces hollowed by cold and hours without rest, hands wrapped, tied, or left bare where there was nothing left to cover them with. "Stay close," he said. No speech followed, no attempt to command more than that. They moved as one line. Step, pause, step again. The world beyond a few yards dissolved into white and shadow. The ground shifted underfoot, where drifts had reshaped it. More than once, a man lost his footing and had to be pulled back by those nearest him. No one turned around. The town behind them no longer held anything worth returning to. The smoke ahead did. They followed it the way men follow water when they have gone too long without it, not because they understood it, but because it was the only thing left that had not failed. And for the first time since the storm began, no one spoke of what should be there, only of what might still be. By the time they reached the base of the hillside, the line had tightened. Not from order, from need. Rourke moved ahead of the others, eyes fixed on the place where the smoke broke against the air and disappeared into the stone. He did not call out. He did not question what he would find, because whatever was there, it was the last thing between them and the end of the storm. They found the entrance the way a man finds something he was never meant to see, not by looking for a door, but by following what did not belong. The smoke thinned as they climbed, breaking against a scatter of dark stones set into the slope. From a distance, it had looked like nothing. Up close, it still did until the angle shifted, and the ground revealed a narrow line where earth had been cut, then hidden again. Rourke stopped there. For a moment, no one moved. Then the shape changed. The line became an opening, and from it, a figure stepped forward. Luther Hale stood in the entrance, framed by the earth itself, not exposed to the wind, not marked by the cold in the way the others were. His coat held its form. His breath did not tear from him. Bran stood just behind his leg, still and watchful. Rourke looked at him as if seeing something that did not fit into any order he had known. "You," he said, the word catching on air that had no warmth left in it. "You're alive." Luther did not answer that. He looked past Rourke, taking in the line behind him, the ones who could no longer stand straight, the ones being held upright by others, the ones whose hands no longer worked as hands should. Then his eyes came back to the man at the front. "You said a stray goes to ground," Luther said. "No anger in it. No edge. Just the words," returned. Rourke's jaw tightened, not in defiance, in recognition. "I was wrong," he said. The sentence came slower than any he had spoken before. "About all of it." The wind shifted again, driving cold through the line behind him. Someone stumbled. Another voice broke, then stopped. "There are children," Rourke added, lower now, "and men who won't make another hour out here." He did not step forward. He did not reach. He stood where he was and waited, because there was nothing left to demand. Luther held his gaze a moment longer. Then he stepped back from the entrance, not wide, not open, just enough. "There's room," he said, and the earth, which had been closed to them all winter, finally let them in. The entrance narrowed behind them as the last man stepped inside. Cold followed for a moment, thin, sharp, searching. Then it ended at the threshold. The chamber held. 19 people filled a space that had been built for one. Shoulders touched. Breath gathered. The sound of movement changed, softened by packed earth and low ceiling. No wind, no drifting snow, no loss of direction. Only the steady, contained warmth that did not rise and vanish, but stayed where it was made. Luther Hale did not speak at first. He moved. He set order before comfort. Wood was brought in from the entry stack, cut short, and fed into the narrow firebox in measured intervals. Not too much, not too fast. The flames stayed controlled, pulling clean through the pipe without smoke returning to the room. "Small fire," he said once, as a man reached for more than was needed. "It holds longer." Food came next, not passed freely, not wasted. He opened the lower storage pit and brought up what had been set aside: dried meat, roots, portions already measured by weight, not by hunger. Each share was handed out with the same care it had been stored. "Eat slow," he said. "You make it last. It lasts." Some listened immediately, others learned by watching. Bran moved between them without noise, settling near the wall, rising when someone shifted too quickly, sensing the strain in bodies that had come too close to breaking. Days passed without the sky. Time marked itself by the rhythm of the fire, the turning of rations, the quiet changes in breathing as strength returned where it had nearly been lost. Children, at first still and wide-eyed, began to move again, small steps in the narrow space, hands brushing against walls that held instead of giving way. Their voices returned before the adults allowed their own. The storm continued above them. It did not matter. The earth did not answer to it. On the third night, one of the men sat near the stove and looked at the packed wall beside him, pressing his palm against it as if testing something he could not name. "It's warm," he said, more to himself than anyone else. Luther did not look up. "It stays that way," he answered. No explanation followed. It did not need one. Everything that had been doubted was now in front of them, holding, working, unchanged by the force that had taken everything else. Above ground, structures had failed. Down here, Nothing moved that was not meant to. And in that still, contained space, the measure of the storm changed. It was no longer something to survive. It was something being endured outside, without them. When the second week came to its end, every child who had walked in was still breathing. That was the only count that mattered. When the storm finally broke, it did not end with a sound. It lifted. The wind fell away first, as if something had withdrawn its hand from the land. Then the sky opened in thin layers, light returning not as warmth, but as distance revealing what had been done. Relief teams reached Dry Creek Crossing days later. They found what was left: collapsed roofs, buried doorways, lines where houses had stood and no longer did. The town had not been emptied, but it had been reduced. Names were counted. Some were spoken, some were not. And always, in the telling, the same detail returned. Smoke from the hillside. No cabin, no structure anyone had seen before the storm. Just that thin line that had remained when everything else had failed. They followed it, as the survivors had. This time in clear light, this time without doubt. At the entrance, the ground opened the same way it had before, narrow, angled, hidden until the last moment. And inside, the proof still held. Luther Hale stood there as the others had first seen him, unchanged in the ways that mattered. Not untouched by what had happened, but not broken by it either. Councilman Thaddeus Rourke stood among the survivors, no longer at the front of anything. He did not wait to be asked. "I was wrong," he said, voice carrying across what remained of the gathered people. Not loud, not forced, just clear enough that no one could mistake it. About him. About this. He gestured, not broadly, but toward the hillside, the chamber beneath it, the work he had once dismissed without understanding. "I thought I knew what held in winter," he continued. "I was wrong about that too." He turned toward Luther, not as a councilman, not as a man with standing, but as one who had come through something he had not been prepared for. "I owe you my life," he said, "and more than that, I owe you the truth I refused to see." Luther listened. He did not step forward. He did not answer immediately. When he spoke, it was not to correct and not to accept anything that had been offered to him. "I didn't build it for you," he said. The words did not carry weight beyond what they were. "I built it because there wasn't anywhere else to stand." A pause. Then, as if finishing a thought that had never needed to be spoken until now, "The storm decides." Nothing followed that. It did not need to. Ephraim Voss stood near the edge of the group, watching the hillside more than the men upon it. He gave no speech, no claim. The work had spoken for him long before this moment. In the seasons that followed, the place took on a name, not given all at once, not written first, but spoken. Smoke from nowhere. It was said when a man prepared too early, when someone built more than others thought necessary, when caution looked like foolishness until it did not. Luther Hale stayed on that ground. He widened the chamber, reinforced what it already held, taught those who came willing to learn how to read the land the way it had to be read, not the way men preferred to see it. Councilman Thaddeus Rourke did not return to standing where he once had. He remained in the town, but not above it, quieter, slower to speak, faster to listen, because there are winters a man survives. And there are winters that change what he believes about survival. Dry Creek Crossing remembered that one, not for the storm itself, but for what endured beneath it. The smoke still rose on cold mornings, thin, gray, steady, and no one in that valley ever mistook it for nothing again. If you saw smoke rising from a hillside with no cabin, would you ignore it? Or go looking?